The gates of the Kisutu resident magistrate's court stand under tight security as buses carrying dozens of protesters arrive in central Dar es Salaam. Authorities say these individuals were arrested before and during Tanzania's October 29 election, following a wave of unrest that swept across several urban centres. According to police statements, 74 suspects have now been formally arraigned. They face charges including intending to obstruct the 2025 general election and causing serious damage to government properties. The arrests come amid mounting scrutiny from human rights groups who say the government's response to the post-election unrest has been marked by excessive force and mass detentions. A joint statement from several Tanzanian rights organisations said hundreds of people were arrested nationwide on and after Election Day. The statement alleges that the detentions were carried out in violation of the constitutional right to assembly and political expression. At the Kisutu court complex, scenes unfolded early Friday morning as police escorted detainees from a convoy of buses. Some were handcuffed as they were led into the courtroom under the watch of heavily armed officers. Among them were both men and women, many appearing exhausted after days in custody. Witnesses described a heavy security presence in the surrounding streets, with police vehicles blocking access to nearby intersections and government buildings. The Tanzanian police force has not yet released full details of the specific charges against each defendant. The October 29 vote, part of the local and regional electoral calendar ahead of next year's general elections, had been billed by officials as a test of the nation's political climate and readiness. However, the process was marred by reports of clashes between security forces and demonstrators in several districts, including Mwanza, Arusha, and the capital region. Election observers reported isolated incidents of ballot destruction and property damage, though the National Electoral Commission insisted that voting proceeded peacefully in most regions. In Dar es Salaam, police confirmed that several government vehicles and polling materials were vandalised, prompting what they described as a coordinated security response. The Ministry of Home Affairs later issued a statement warning that any attempt to destabilise the democratic process or interfere with national institutions would be met with prosecution. Rights groups have challenged that position, saying the broad interpretation of obstruction could criminalise political dissent. The Legal and Human Rights Centre, one of the country's most prominent civil society organisations, said in its statement that the mass arrests are disproportionate and risk silencing legitimate political expression. Court officials said initial hearings would focus on procedural matters, including bail, applications and requests for legal representation. Some detainees are being held under sections of the Penal Code relating to public order offences, which carry penalties of up to 10 years in prison if convicted. Footage from the Kisutu court shows uniformed officers forming a line outside as the buses arrive. Flags of Tanzania flutter above the entrance as plainclothes security personnel monitor journalists and onlookers from the court perimeter. Inside, the defendants were escorted into the main courtroom in small groups. No media were allowed inside during the session, though reporters were permitted to film outside the courthouse compound. Families of several detainees gathered near the court entrance, some holding placards demanding their relatives' release. One woman, speaking briefly before police moved the crowd back, said her brother had been detained while returning from work on Election Day and had not been charged until now. The government has not commented on allegations of arbitrary arrest. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Information and Communications said earlier this week that law enforcement agencies are following due process in handling those suspected of criminal activity. Political analysts note that the timing of the arrests, coming immediately after a tense election, reflects continuing friction between state institutions and opposition movements. In recent years, Tanzania has faced criticism from international observers over restrictions on political rallies, media freedoms, and the activities of civil society groups. The October 29 unrest marks the most serious wave of election-related violence since 2020, when clashes erupted in Zanzibar and other regions. The ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi, has maintained that security measures are necessary to prevent instability and protect national interests. Opposition leaders, however, accuse authorities of using the unrest as a pretext to detain activists and suppress dissenting voices ahead of the 2025 general election. A senior figure in the opposition party, Chidema, said the arrests are part of a deliberate pattern to intimidate voters and weaken political competition. The statement has not been independently verified, but it echoes broader concerns raised by civil society groups and regional human rights monitors. Meanwhile, police have continued to patrol several neighbourhoods of Dar es Salaam, especially near university campuses and major intersections that saw protests last week. Eyewitnesses reported sporadic demonstrations in the Mikocheni and Ubungo areas, though no new clashes have been confirmed since November 2. In the coastal city of Tanga, local media outlets reported that community leaders have called for calm, urging residents to respect the legal process and avoid confrontation with security forces. The government's communication office emphasised that trials would proceed in accordance with Tanzanian law and under judicial oversight. Court officials said hearings are expected to continue through mid-November as prosecutors present initial evidence and the defence prepares responses. Legal experts say the case could test the limits of the country's electoral laws, particularly the interpretation of intention to obstruct a national vote. Under Tanzanian law, prosecutors must demonstrate that defendants acted with clear purpose and coordination to disrupt the electoral process. If convicted, the accused could face extended prison sentences or restrictions on future political participation. International reaction has so far been limited, though regional human rights groups in Kenya and Uganda have expressed concern over what they describe as a worrying trend of criminalising political expression. The East African Human Rights Network called on Tanzanian authorities to ensure fair trials and transparency, stating that the credibility of next year's election depends on how the justice system handles these cases. Diplomatic missions in Dar es Salaam have not issued formal statements but continue to monitor developments closely. Foreign observers say the unfolding legal proceedings may serve as an indicator of Tanzania's broader human rights trajectory ahead of 2025. As buses carrying the remaining detainees pull away from the Kisutu court compound, police maintain their posts along the perimeter fence. The flags outside continue to flutter in the humid coastal wind, a symbol of state authority amid the tension of an ongoing judicial process. No date has yet been set for the full trial. Officials confirm that further hearings will take place once formal indictments are reviewed and Defence Counsel assignments are finalised. The government says it will release updates through official channels while rights groups continue to document the treatment of detainees. For now, the case of the 74 protesters remains at the centre of Tanzania's post-election debate, a test of the balance between public order and political freedom in one of East Africa's fastest-growing democracies. The Kisutu court proceedings mark the latest phase in Tanzania's response to post-election unrest, as authorities pursue charges against dozens accused of disrupting the electoral process, while rights groups call for transparency and due process in the months ahead. The outcome of these proceedings is expected to set a significant precedent for how Tanzania manages politically charged cases in the lead-up to the 2025 general election. Legal analysts warn that the decisions taken in the Kisutu courtroom could influence the level of public confidence in the judiciary, the scope of civil liberties during the campaign season, and the overall credibility of the upcoming vote. Across Dar es Salaam and other major cities, security remains heightened as authorities seek to prevent further unrest. Civil society organisations continue to urge restraint on all sides, emphasising that maintaining peace and ensuring lawful accountability will be critical to safeguarding Tanzania's democratic process in the months ahead.